Sales organization, you want 60% or better of your business coming from referrals.
And so now I'm learning that things are not so straightforward like that. Yeah. That's coming with time, maturity, emotional intelligence.
I started getting into the environment hunting at 7.
Oh, wow.
Because I started to shoot the bow, bow and arrow and learning that.
What I learned is that people don't like the scripted version of you.
Well, guess what? That building was 100% leased, fully spoken for prior to certificate of occupancy.
I think that people don't see that. They just think, like exactly how you said, like it's just like, oh, I just woke up here.
There's two sides to passion, right? There's a harmonious side and there's an obsessive side.
Sometimes you expect the punch because that leaves the person open. So, I knew where to take my hits. I knew when to duck.
He looked at me straight in my face and told me, listen, I'm good whether you make it or you don't. I'm good. You're not.
Welcome to another episode of the Bottom Line Podcast, where we say what we mean and we mean what we say, because at the core of everything that is, was, and forever will be, there will always be the bottom line. Today's guest. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Bottom Line Podcast, where we say what we mean and we mean what we say, because at the core of everything that is, was, and forever will be, there will always be the bottom line. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I want to talk a little bit about some things that I think people need to hear who are probably not happy to hear what I want to talk about, but that's okay. Because I think, listen, I don't make out the rules. I just kind of see what's going on. And I'm like, oh, if you connect the dots, it all makes sense, right? So I say that to say this. A lot of people are talking a lot about how women talk about how men are dogs and how men are not good, and how men talk about how women are not good, and women are too manly and all this stuff, and they're complaining about each other and nothing gets done. And now you have women that are acting like men that are, I don't got a problem. Like if you are into fights and you like to fight as a woman, or maybe you're into fitness and you like to, compete, in fitness, I don't have a problem with that. Okay, maybe you're a woman in business and then you're like really good at doing business. I don't have a problem with that, right? But we've made a huge shift toward, when it comes to gender roles in this country, that has changed so much from when I was a kid. Like from when I first got into sales, there were not a lot of women in sales. When I first got into sales, now women are actually dominating the sales industry, believe it or not. Okay. If you look at the success rate of men and women in sales, if you look at a demographic between, I'd say, about 25 to about 35 years old, okay, whether it's men or women, okay, you're going to see that a lot of women between 25 and 35 are actually doing a lot better than men in sales. Is it because they're women? Is it because they're beautiful? Is it because they wear makeup? Is it because they're attractive? Possibly. Why are men struggling, between 25 and 35, but they do better between 40 and about 55 years old? Why is that? I mean, there's a ton of different reasons that I can give you, but I can say that when I first started out, men 25 to about 30 years old were in sales. They were just starting to, see a lot of growth and progress, because they were still kind of, cutting their teeth and making and getting their experience, right? Where women are coming in at that age and they're just more aggressive. They actually have a lot of masculine traits. And so they're outperforming men at that age range between 25 and 35 years old. I'm seeing it. Okay. So I say that because when you have that dynamic, when you have the man acting like I don't want to say men are acting like women. I'm just saying that they're comparing themselves to women when it comes to how, they're performing in the sales force or even in the job market. Then you get women who start to feel like, they don't have to get a man. They don't need to rely on a man because they can do what men can do. And that shifts the dynamic when it comes to creating a family, when it comes to getting married, when it comes to, who's the breadwinner, when it comes to the provider role. All of this makes a big impact when it comes to the decision on who you're dating, who you're going to marry, who you're going to have children with, right? And men nowadays are not, of the mindset that if I get married, I have to be the provider. They look at it more as a 50-50 kind of thing, where it's like, she has to do her part. What does she bring to the table? And that was not a conversation when I was coming up at all, right? I mean, I'm from New York. So in New York, you got guys who, in my era, we were looking at women as luxury, right? Like if you're not on your ball, if you're not hustling, if you're not grinding, if you don't have nothing to offer, if you can't take a girl out to a place other than the fast food restaurants, you probably should not be dating. That's the era I grew up in. And that's how it was when I was, probably 15 all the way up to 25. You know what I mean? That 10-year span, like I got my first job at 14 years old working at giving out flyers, and I worked at McDonald's, then I had a night job with the clubs. I was making a lot of money. I probably made like $500 a week when I was 15 years old working in the club scene. Okay. And anybody that I hung out with, they were making that kind of money. All right. And, we had multiple jobs, my guys, my boys, you know what I mean? And, we had a lot of women, like we had a lot of girls. They would just chase us around because they knew we had the money and we had access. That's what it was. We had access. We didn't pay for things like guys are paying for things now. We didn't have to pay for things because we had access. And if you have access, what that means is you don't have to pay for things. You don't have to be a simp, right? And what we have today is a generation of simps, okay, where they're pretty much at the women's disposal and they'll do whatever the woman wants. And it's like they don't have to necessarily, be a provider because the woman has already got that figured out. They're buying their own houses, they're flipping their own properties, they're buying their own bags, they're buying their own cars. So, it's different now for a lot of guys, right? And they're like, well, I don't even know how to compete with these women. And then we want to say, oh, it's a Western woman thing, when really the times have changed significantly, but the standards haven't, okay? The standards have not changed, all right? So why do I say that? I say that because these guys, Trump just came out with the idea of a 50-year mortgage, right? And people are like, well, I don't know if it's a good play or if it's a bad play. I don't know if, what it is. I'll be honest with you. It's a long-term generational play, okay? A generation is 40 years. A generation is 40 years. So a 50-year mortgage is a generational play. It's not for, just for you to say, you know what, I think I want to buy a house and, and I'm going to use a 50-year mortgage, knowing that you're probably going to default on a loan, knowing that you're not going to raise a family, knowing that you're not going to have, you're going to, be with multiple women, or women, you're going to be with multiple fellas, right? Knowing that you're going to have baby mamas, you're not really looking for a house, knowing whatever it is, if you're knowing that you don't have a 50-year play, then you probably should not get a 50-year mortgage, hands down, because you're not thinking generationally. Okay. So what I've noticed, is that people don't think generationally. People barely think in decades. All right. People are thinking like literally hand to mouth, 2 weeks apart, next paycheck, next deal, right? Maybe 3 to 6 months out, you're thinking, because that's when your next deal closes, but you're not thinking generationally. And so the 50-year mortgage is a generational play, right? So now if you think about the 25 to 35 age range, that demographic, right? Men and women together, and I say sales because sales is where you're going to make the most money. That 50-year play, that 50-year mortgage might be a good deal. It just might be a good deal if you're thinking generationally, okay? And I say that because the next generation, okay, the next group of 25 years old, there's a trend going on right now in New York with these quarter zips. That generation is coming up, and I like what I'm seeing, because that's original New York right there, right? I mean, I'm a product of that. You know what I mean? Like, we don't get face tattoos. We try to stay as clean cut as possible, right? Because we know that at the end of the day, if we clean up and we get a job and we start really investing in ourselves, the sky's the limit. That's the rotten apple. That's the big city. That's the concrete jungle, right? So that generation that you see now, those boys running around doing the quarter zips, right? And look at their following on social media. Look how many people follow them, right? Look at how they're changing the game. This is how it was when we were coming up without social media. You hit a certain age, you hit like 15, 16 years old, all of a sudden you're going to, especially come around the wintertime, you're going to switch your swag up real quick because you're going to start looking for retail jobs. When you start looking for retail jobs, you start working in the malls, now you can start stacking those checks, right? So when I was in high school, you get one retail job, right? You work at the mall, then you go work at a fast food restaurant, you got 2 checks coming in, now you can go buy a car, right? Now you can go get a girl, okay? And then now you can go get a girl, you taking her to the restaurant that nobody's taking her to. That's why guys started eating sushi. You know what I mean? Guys weren't eating sushi when I was coming up. Not like that. No. Guys started doing that because, girls wanted sushi. We would eat whatever. It didn't matter. We weren't eating sushi, right? Like, we're dudes. We would eat like pizza and fast food and all that. Then a girl tell you, oh, I like sushi. You're like, what the hell is that? Then you take this girl out and she starts eating, she takes you to a sushi spot, Japanese spot, and all of a sudden now you're like, and you go to your boys and you're like, yo, sushi, right? And this is how women impact men. Where I'm from, how I grew up, it was kind of like the woman that walks through the door before you is a representation of your standards and your ideals. Nowadays, it's a little different. Girls are running around with these lashes and, with these nails and the extra, black girls, white girls, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter, because each of them have their own way of applying the same thing differently, aesthetics, you name it. Okay. And guys are like, they're looking at these women as their objects. And the women now are more objectified than they were back then. Okay. You know what I mean? So with that, you're not looking at men who are trying to have families. You're not looking at men who are trying to buy houses. You're not looking at men who are, trying to have a wifey and do the father thing and do the family thing. You're not looking at those kinds of men like that. They're not thinking about a 50-year mortgage, but those guys are extremely successful. You got the Jeff Bezos and the Lauren Sanchez, and they're not buying houses at that age. They're not buying it. They're not with that standard, the synthetic standard, they're not buying houses. They want to be more superficial, right? They want to live in, however they want to live according to what's going on now, whatever is like, fashionable. You know what I mean? But the 50-year mortgage is for it's a for a more conservative social class. Okay, that's going back to the standards of what it used to be, what America used to be, where you can be 23 up to like maybe 33, and that's when you're buying your house. You're having between 23 and 33. You're gonna get married. You're gonna graduate college. You're gonna buy a house. You're gonna do these things that's going to make you more of a product of the American dream, right? It's less superficial, it's less the dating scene, and it's more conservative values. That's who's being targeted with these 50-year mortgages. And that's where we need to make the change in the dating scene. And that's where young men, as you see happening with this quarter zip movement that these kids are doing now, this trend, that's showing you, who's going to be benefiting from the 50-year mortgages. Because if that generation is making that shift, and they're starting to realize that they're actually, value adds to any marketplace, right? I love what I'm seeing. I'm telling you, I'm loving it, because that's how we were transitioning when we were kids, right? We took off the hoodies and we cut our hair, no more, braids, right? We started getting clean cut and we started wearing suits, right? And then we started going out to get job interviews and doing the button downs. I love what I'm seeing right there, right? Why? Because, that's how we started to get the better understanding of how the world works. When you go out there, you interview, when you shake hands, and you get hired for a position in retail that's very high end, right? And you start, getting that kind of recognition. You start to pull in that kind of energy. You're going to attract that kind of woman that's going to want to be a wife, that's going to want to be a mother, right? And she doesn't want to get a job that's like, that's going to take away from her being a mother, that's going to take away from her being a wife, that's going to take away from her being a helpmeet. You know what I mean? You start to meet conservative women that are more focused on God, that are more focused on their purpose as a woman, okay, as a partner, okay, as a wife, as a mom. They start thinking like they've already had these ideas, and they come from families that were training them on how to be wives and how to be mothers, you know what I mean? And that's what I think the 50-year mortgage is going for. It's that generational play. It's for the next generation, right? Not only that, here's the other thing. You're starting to see that there's a revival in the country right now where a lot of people are going towards God. More people are going towards God. They're going towards Jesus, right? There's a big push towards Christianity, okay? And I'm not talking about your whitewashed Christianity, where when I say whitewashed, I mean like domesticated Jesus and, no, people are looking for answers. You start seeing people going more towards, the Old Testament, like, Yahweh, right? Yah's way, the way, Yeshua, right? Okay, because people are starting to see the holes, like in the whole, the division between all the Christian denominations, right? And you start to see more women. Like you got this, the girls now, Girls Gone Bible, big deal, right? That's a huge movement. That's part of the revival, right? You've got Philip Anthony Mitchell. That's another one, right? 2819, huge revival, right? And there's so many others. And guess who's tapping into that, right? It's the youth, right? It's that generation. They're starting to find God. So we're getting right back to the core values of what it is to be an American, right? We're getting right back to the core values of what it is to cement and solidify, right? The fabric of American values, right? What is that? It's God, right? In God we trust. We're starting to see a revival and a trend in that direction. You know what I mean? And not just like, the commercialized Christianity. No. We're seeing a movement where we're talking about, people who are God to lead their lives, right? That they're practicing celibacy now. People are practicing celibacy. People are abstaining from promiscuity. Like that's amazing. This is a huge shift that's happening, right? And if you look at the birth rate in America versus the birth rate in say a China, a Japan, right, or even in India, right, you start to see that our birth rate in this country is declining because men are going head to head against women. It doesn't make any sense. And if you look at the kind of men that are going head to head with women, right, it's usually the superficial man, right, who's a quote unquote high value man, which is not a really high value man because the guy's been with so many women, right, and he's not preserving his seed. Then you've got women who are like, aesthetically, they look great, right? They're aesthetically pleasing, right? But they believe that they are the ones they're the trophy wives, right? So they have the mindset that, oh, if he's with me, I make him look good and he should pay for that, right? And these people are not producing. They're not, they're not, when I say producing, I mean, they're not reproducing, right? They're not having children. They're not, going towards the sanctity of marriage. They're not, having a union. They're not buying a house. They're living separate lives, right? And so, I blame the Kardashians, right? I blame the Ray J. I blame the Kanye, right? Because, who the celebrities are dating and who they are, having children with, that's what we follow in the American culture. We follow like trends, right? That we see celebrities are following. And look at a Taylor Swift, for instance, right? Taylor Swift is one of those names that you see. She's very well known. All her albums are about breakups, but Taylor Swift is getting married, right? Like that's a transition. That's what's happening, right? And there's like the MAGA movement. They're like, oh, is she MAGA now because she's actually she's starting to exhibit conservative values and getting married, and settling down. Her everything is changing, right? And so when you look at that, I mean, that's on the white side, right? Like that's white conservative values, if you want to call it that. But there's other women that are not as popularized in the Hispanic culture, in the Black culture, in the Caribbean culture, right? Who are just, these people are value-based people, God-fearing people who want to, serve God, right? And they want to buy houses and they want to serve God and buy houses and have families and be fruitful and multiply. You know what I mean? Like you start to see a lot of that. It's like, yeah, media focuses on a Taylor Swift, media might focus on a Kanye West and a Kim Kardashian, and it shows you, where you can see that there's a divide in America, okay? And where people are kind of like, not just promiscuous, but like they only care about themselves. They're very self-centered and they want what they want when they want it. And they're very driven by immediate gratification. You know what I mean? And it's like, yes, it's aesthetically pleasing, but it's also displeasing when you're like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, and you find yourself alone, right? And that's what a lot of feminists are finding, right? The whole feminist movement, right? They're starting to realize like, crap, I got a cat. I should have had a man. I should have gotten pregnant. I should have had a house. I should have been, taking care of my man. I should have been more, feminine so I don't end up by myself. They're starting to suffer with that now, right? You got women that are freezing their eggs because they can't find the right man because they become too successful, right? They went to college, they got a degree, they became too successful. And now men are like, I can't even do anything for you, right? So you find men that are, they have multiple women, and a lot of them are going to be significantly younger than them because the younger women, and the rule of thumb, fellas, is half your age plus 7, right? That's usually the rule of thumb, half your age plus 7. Like for me, Abraham in the Bible was 10 or 9 years, I think 10 years older than Sarah, right? My parents were 9 years apart. When I do the math on, half my age plus 7, then I get, the woman that I end up with, half my age plus 7, is significantly younger than my current ex-wife, but that woman will be able to give me multiple children with every 2 years, right? And that's being fruitful and being plentiful and having dominion over the earth as I was called to do. And that's what, we were called to do as men, right? Be fruitful and multiply as God's creation, right? So the 50-year mortgage, I know it sounds like crazy, right? But I'm thinking about it. It sounds like you got to understand something. Like it's not so much about the fact that it's a mortgage. It's more about what it's centered around. what it's shooting towards, right? And that's a generational play. It's for the next generation. It's like you got to think generationally, right? What you do now is going to affect the next generation. So if you're a parent, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, right? If you are a husband or a wife, if you're engaged, right? Even right now, if you're dating, like think generationally, you know what I mean? Because when you start to see things through a spiritual lens, what you realize is that there's generational curses and generational blessings, right? And when you look at Abraham, you start to see generational blessings. You see what I'm saying? And then when you look at the line of Esau, you start to see generational curses. You see? And it's like, which ones do you want your children to inherit? Do you want your children to inherit generational blessings or generational curses, right? And then you take it out of the spiritual and then you put it in the physical and and you make it practical and you look at it and you say, well, do I want my children to inherit generational debt or generational wealth, right? And it's like it's the same thing, just applied physically and practically in our present day. Do you want your children to inherit generational wealth or generational debt? Right? Well, the 50-year mortgage is a play towards generational wealth by using debt that doesn't necessarily have to be generational debt. Okay. There's ways for you to get around that play, that 50-year mortgage play, where you can leverage it so you can do certain things. So, for example, if you are right now between the ages of 25 and about 35 years old and you're in a serious relationship and you guys want to spend more time together and you are dating with the intention to marry, then the 50-year play, a mortgage with a 50-year play is a good idea. Why? Because you can buy a multifamily, occupy one unit, and then you can rent out the other units. Then this way you get the problem that a lot of women have is that they realize that they can't find the right man to do this with. But then if you are, not thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about fulfilling God's will for you, God's purpose for your life, you will find the right man. You will attract the right man because you will become a God-fearing woman, right? And then so you will pull in the right man and you will pull in a man of God, right? And now the two of you can make a whole. So two broken pieces will come together and make a whole. And when you make a whole, you make a home. And when you make a home, you become, you have the head of the household. I just learned how to put it in those terms recently. But I've always had that mindset, right? Because that's what it is when you have a biblically based marriage. Okay. Is the enemy going to come after your marriage? Absolutely. Which has to make your faith much stronger, right? But now if you are thinking, you know what, I do want to get married, I do want to have children, but I'm worried about my financial security. I'm worried about job security. I'm worried about, who's going to take care of my children. Well, think about it. Let's be practical here, right? Because one of the tickets that Mom Donnie ran on was free childcare throughout. Universal childcare for New York City. And I'm like, well, how's he going to pull that off? And then Hochul says that she can't do it because the budget doesn't allow it. And the amount of money that it takes for her to do it is actually what the budget is in her reserves. And so they can't do it. She's explored it and she knows that she can't do it. But Mom Donnie ran on it. Why? Because he knows that it's a necessary, that people need it. It's necessary. It's a need, right? Okay. So if you are a young couple right now, 23 to about 33, 25 to about, because you got frontal lobe at 25. So I'd say 25 is a good number, okay? 25 to about 35. If you're dating and you're 25 to 35 and you have a long-term play, meaning you're going to marry this person, you're not thinking about a 50-year mortgage, like a 50-year commitment, you're thinking generationally. You're thinking, I want to have a nice neighborhood, you want to have a nice house, you want to get a nice car, you want your kids to play around in the yard, you don't want to pay, you want to pay what you have to pay in property taxes, you want to have a good school district, you want to make sure if you have in-laws, your in-laws are going to be able to visit and you can accommodate with a guest room, whatever it is. You want to talk about all these things, right? And then so you might say, you know what, let's get a multifamily, let's do a FHA, right? Or even a 5% down right now in a conventional. We can get a multifamily, we can occupy one unit, rent out the other units, right? And when you rent out the other units, now you have passive income, which means as you have passive income, maybe you can use that for childcare. Maybe you guys can work from home and you can spend time with your children so that you don't have to put your children in childcare. Maybe you can hire a nanny. Maybe you can hire a housekeeper. Maybe you can have somebody living in the house and then that person could be a living, nanny. That's a way for you to not have to worry about paying for childcare and your property pays for whatever you need to outsource, okay? Because in the Bible days, you had Hajar. Yes, Hajar was given to Abraham, as a gift from Abimelech, right? But throughout history, women have always had help around the house. Okay, men has always had help around the house. Somebody would do their cleaning, somebody would do their cooking, somebody would be taking care of the baby. They've had midwives, right? Well, guess what? Healthcare now provides all of that. You work your ass off, and then you go and you get a job, and then you have, your health insurance, and you don't get to pick your midwife. You don't get to you get to put your kid in a child care center, and you don't get to really have a relationship with them like that. They don't know really how you live, right? So now you're worried about your kid, but what if in the way that we're headed right now, you could control all of that through a 50-year mortgage? That's also earning an income for you, right? And then you leverage that asset a year later or 2 years later, whether you're going to do a HELOC, whether you're going to pull out some equity, whether you're going to put the property up, leverage it to get other properties so that you can start building your portfolio. Maybe you take some of that money and you put it in the stock market, right? There's so much you can do when you start to leverage that asset, right? And you look at it as like, well, how do I do it to fulfill God's kingdom? How do I use it so that I can do God's will? How do I use it so I can, fulfill God's prophecy that He's written over my life? How do I use it so that I can continue to be fruitful and multiply? There's so many ways. But if it's that you're chasing, these superficial women, right, or these women, if you're chasing these quote unquote high value men, then it's not going to work, right? It's going to fall apart. And yes, divorce rates are at 50% right now, probably a little bit more than that, 55% in this country. Birth rate is low because the divorce rate is high. So it wouldn't make sense for you to take out a 50-year mortgage. But there's a future generation of kids out there right now, okay? I'd say between 23 and 33, between 25 and 35, I think frontal lobe development is very important, because if you have 2 years, okay, of using frontal lobe and making decisions, okay, you can make the decision and you can have some foresight, and you can say, you know what, this is a 10-year play. Okay, here's a 15-year play. Okay, here's a 20-year play, right? And by the time your kids are ready to get married, all right, when you say that you're 25, 35 years old right now, 25 to 35 years old right now, and you're planning your life, by the time your kids are ready to graduate high school and they're ready to go to college, you're thinking about, 529, paying for college, all this stuff. You don't have to think about it anymore because you already have an asset. You already have, income that came from that asset, that came from, that 50-year mortgage, so that you can prepare for that generation. It's a generational play, ladies and gentlemen. It's a generational play. And I can tell you this, most customs, most cultures that think generationally, they outlive cultures that do not think generationally. Okay? And you can see that with the Muslims, you can see that with the Chinese, you can see that with the Japanese, you can see that with the Arabs, you can see that, with the Indians. I mean, you could see that all over the place, right? Cultures, people, families, civilizations that think generationally outlive civilizations that do not think generationally. So this is an attempt at making a generational play, and this is going to be part of what Trump leaves behind as part of his legacy. He's thinking about Barron. He's thinking about his grandkids. He's thinking about Kai Trump. He's thinking about, his grandkids. He's thinking about them. He's like, how do I make home ownership more available for people that are of that age range that do not have the advantages that my grandkids have? Okay? Because that's really what it is. America is one of those countries where you can literally work at, and I've seen this and I'm like, whoa, this is crazy, right? Like, you don't necessarily need to have a college degree for you to hit 100 grand a year. Definitely not. You can get a job at freaking, at Chipotle, okay? You can get a job at Starbucks, all right? And you can hit that 100 grand a year as one person, okay? And especially in this digital economy that we're living in now, how easy it is to make money online. Can you imagine how easy it is for you to be able to sit at home, make money from home, have your children, hire your children on, right? And then give them a job and then do a lot of other things if you're thinking generationally, right? And how to set them up to win, right? And like, think about it. How many people do you know right now who are working for the next generation and the generation that comes after that? Not a lot. Not a lot. Okay? We're thinking 3 years out. I know some people who are thinking 5 years out. Okay? I need you to start thinking 10, 20, 30, 40 years out, generationally, right? That 50-year mortgage might be a good play if it's biblically sound, if you're doing it because you're going to have a family and you're doing it biblically. Okay? If you're doing that and you're treating, here's the other thing I'm gonna leave you with, right? Before we wrap this up. Okay. If you're treating your wife, fellas, okay, Sarah's name, Sarah, means princess. Okay. It also means noble woman. All right. Abraham, his name in Hebrew means father of nations. Okay. So, fellas, one of the reasons I brought back this podcast is for me to really promote and invite you to Fathers America, Top Fathers for America. I want to invite you to Fathers for America, fellas. It's a brotherhood where iron sharpens iron, and we as men start to reclaim our roles and our purposes as men, as leaders of our families, of our children, right, and as fathers. Okay, as we are called upon to do by the Father in heaven Himself, Yahweh Elohim. Okay. And so what does that mean? That means walking in God's ways and keeping God's commandments and applying them and teaching them to our children. Okay. Now, before you can be a father, you should study the Father. And one of the fathers that he created is Abraham, the father of nations. That's what his name means. Okay. He married, or yes, he had to, or he was, Sarah became his wife, as it is written. Okay. Because his brother died. You know, his brother was a pagan, and his father was a pagan, and Mesopotamia was just pagan. And he realized the one true God, Yahweh Elohim, and Yahweh Elohim spoke with him and said he wants him to leave the land, leave his father's land, and go in the direction of Canaan, right? And so with that, you know, they had a shop, and it was an idol shop, and pagans come over and buy, idols, graven images, okay, and Abraham set it on fire. His brother dies, and when his brother dies, he becomes responsible for Lot, which is his nephew, and he takes on the kinsman redeemer role, and Sarah becomes his wife. Sarah means princess, noble woman. Okay, so a princess is a noble woman. All right. If us men start treating our women like they're noble women, they're not gonna go and be with multiple men because we treat them as their noble women. You never heard about Sarah being with multiple men. You never heard about Rebecca being with multiple men. You never heard about Rachel being with multiple men. You never heard about Leah being with multiple men. You never heard of Mary being multiple men, even though that's what Joseph thought. But you never heard of any of these women, Elizabeth being with multiple men. You never heard of Ruth being with multiple men. You never heard of Naomi being with multiple men. You just never heard of it. You see what I'm saying? So most men want a woman who's just with one man, them. Is that going to be easy to find? Probably not, because there are also prostitutes in the Bible. And if you know the story of Gomer, Gomer was a prostitute, right? But once the woman makes up her mind that she's going to be with one man, it's your job to treat her like the princess, like that noble woman. How do you do that? Well, they become princesses and noble women through motherhood. Okay? And you become a father of a nation through fatherhood. Okay? A nation could literally be like you have 10 kids and you can go 12 kids. You can go down from there. Well, if you do the formula and you say you're going to marry a woman who's going to be half your age plus 7, she could possibly give you 8 to 12 kids if she's giving you one kid every 2 years. Okay? But in order to do that, you have to provide. You have to be a provider. So that's why I'm a big proponent of the dowry system, being able to pay. Okay? And it shows that you're able to create and generate an income to provide. All right? Now, if you can do that, you have a thriving business, right? Or you have an idea that can become a thriving business. Now you're in a position for you to have that many children with one woman. Now, back in the day, they used to marry multiple women. If your wife is okay with that, I would not suggest it. But if your wife is okay with that, and that's something that you guys discuss, and it's strictly for the means of producing, that's something you guys got to take up with your, with your pastor, with God, whatever it is. But my advice is treat the one woman you have as if she's a noble woman, as if she's a princess, and provide for her. If you're able to do that, you will benefit long-term, generationally from that situation in terms of, 1, you have a woman who's taking care of your home. 2, a woman that's raising your children. 3, you have a place to call home, which is your peace. 4, you have a nation behind you. And you start to implement God's laws and advance God's kingdom through your children, right? And the bigger your nation, the bigger your tribe, the bigger your family, the more space you're going to need. And that's how you've got the growth of the nation of Israel. I'm not talking about the country Israel. I'm talking about Israel, who was Yaakov and the man who struggled with God. And yes, you're going to get that growth, right? You get the 12 tribes of Israel, okay? And you also have the 12 tribes of Ishmael. But what I'm saying is, if you're thinking more long term, you're like, you know what? Because it costs you about 250 a year to raise a kid, something like that. Okay, so if you're making about 250 a year combined, you guys can have a kid. You can have more than one kid if after every 2 years, if you continue to stay on that trajectory of $250,000 a year, okay, net, you can definitely, or even gross, you could do it. You can have more than one kid. You can have one kid every 2 years, and then you can put money aside for the next kid, for the next kids, and the next kids. There's so many plays that you can make. All right, with the 50-year mortgage, so that you can continue to have children and build God's nation, right? And increase the birth rate, right? If we can have more sustainable marriages, we can increase the birth rate and we can become a nation that serves God. It's a long play. It's an optimistic play, but it can be done, right? If you're doing it biblically and you're biblically sound, right? And you're honoring your wife the same way Abraham honored Sarah. Okay, you can be a father of nations if you treat your woman like a princess, like a noble woman. I like to leave you this one thing. I like the show that I'm watching. It's called Kuruluş Osman. It's Turkish, and it's about the Ottoman Empire, and they took over the Byzantine Empire, and they ruled for 600 years. They call their women Hatun, and Hatun means noble woman. So they'll say the woman's name and they call them Hatun. They never call them outside of that. They always call them something Hatun. One of the main guys is Osman. Osman's wife, her name is Bala, and her name is Bala Hatun. She was the daughter of of what they would call like an imam, like a priest. Okay, they're Muslims. So, and they got everything from, the Jews. So I'm going to tell you that. When I say Jews, I mean the land of Yehuda. Okay, so Yehuda was a kingdom. All right. And so, that kingdom, it kind of like influenced everything that came after that, which was ruled by King David. Okay. So for them to call her Hatun means that she's a noble woman. Even if she came from another tribe and she was the daughter or the wife of a tribe leader, which was a bey, her name would be Hatun, and she was to be treated as such, as a noble woman. If you treat a woman like a noble woman, she will give you babies on top of babies on top of babies on top of babies, because you are providing. Let me tell you something. You're going to say, oh, it's hard to provide for that man. God will give you the ability to provide if you are treating that woman like a noble woman, because she is God's daughter. And so what you do for God's daughter, he will give you provision to provide for his daughter. Okay? So a 50-year mortgage is a play, not just for you, but for the purpose to advance God's kingdom. All right? Through your noble woman. Okay? Pretty big, pretty simple. Pretty big, but pretty simple. All right? So if you take the time to look at things from a biblical perspective and apply the same concepts, the same principles, the same values that you get from the Bible, okay, especially using Abraham, and Sarah as a reference point, I guarantee it, that you will see that 50-year mortgage is not only a generational play, but a viable investment for the next generation. Okay, I'll leave you with that. So I hope you guys are all doing well, and I hope you find value from this episode number 73 of the Bottom Line Podcast. If you are interested in being a guest and you want to share your bottom line, shoot me a comment, like, share, subscribe. Text the coaching line 929-268-5780 to learn about how you can join Fathers for America, a brotherhood where iron sharpens iron, right? We will do weekly Zooms to support our brothers who are going through all kinds of, changes in life, transitions, whatever it is, tough times, hardships, challenges, setbacks, right? Through the grace of God, us brothers, we will, the word is our sword, and that sword is the iron that sharpens the iron that we need. It's the word of God, which is Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord and Savior. If you are in a position right now where you need to get back in touch with your faith, you need to get back in touch with the Word of God, and you want to be, want to be a father, you want to be a better father, you want to be, in a brotherhood where iron sharpens iron. Shoot me a text at 929-268-5780. Just write the word, just write fatherhood, your name and your email address, and we'll set up a time for us to, get on a call, and then we'll add you to the weekly Zoom. Fathers for America Zoom calls. Okay, that's one. Two, if you're a real estate agent right now and you are, ready to get into getting listings to kick off your 2026, shoot me a text 929-268-5780. And so you can learn about my pre-foreclosure sales coaching program. There's a lot of pre-foreclosures on the market throughout the tri-state, but I'm more specifically focused on the 5 boroughs in New York City. Okay. And we could talk about how you can get those listings, what to say, how to say it, how to price the properties, how to educate the property owners on how they can eliminate and alleviate their debt so that they can start over and still walk away with enough money for them to start over. Okay. That's for the pre-foreclosure sales coaching calls. Okay. They can be live Zoom or they could be in person. And if you are right now an agency owner, a team leader, or a salesperson in any sales industry, and you want to get one-on-one or team coaching, text the words Dreamer Development. That's Dreamer Development to 929-268-5780 to sign up for my live Zoom, 2 calls a month. Okay, live Zoom team or individual biz and sales team coaching calls, where we will help your team identify targets, goals, focus on branding, marketing, how to convert, how to lead gen, and how to cultivate and maintain relationships and increase their productivity and performance within a minimal period of time. Okay, and there's a lot. If you're also looking to build your team, expand your team, we can also talk about recruiting. Text the word recruiting or recruit to 929-268-5780 with your name and your email address and what industry you're in. And I've got independent contractors throughout the country. All right, so we can talk a little bit about recruiting. With all of that being said, hope you guys have a phenomenal week. Right, and every effort that we make is centered around raising the bar and kicking off the new year in 2026. Learning from the mistakes that we've made in 2025. All right. So with all that being said, I will catch you guys on the next one. This was the Bottom Line Podcast, where we say what we mean and we mean what we say. Because at the core of everything that is, was, and forever will be, there will always be the bottom line. Hey guys, welcome back. Dennis Development TV. So today I want to talk to you about world domination. Just kidding. Today I want to talk to you about recruiting. Right? And you know what? As a matter of fact, you have to think like you're going to dominate the world, like you're going to conquer the entire world in order for you to find the right talent. See, Genghis Khan had the right idea. That's what people got all confused about, how to recruit. See, what Genghis Khan did is when he took over your land, he didn't just take prisoners of war, he recruited the prisoners. He trained them, and he found out what was the most important thing to them, and they joined his team, and they joined his army. That's how he took over the world. That's how he took over a majority of the world during his day. And so that recruiting approach really works. That's what you want to do when you're looking for talent. You want to find people who have a specific need, who can identify with your cause, with your mission, that they have a particular talent, a skill set that they can use to amplify and bring your business out into the marketplace, to maximize the exposure of your business. That's what recruiting is really about. It's not about just finding people and giving them a paycheck, putting them to work. And I want you to understand, if you're looking for a position, if you're looking for a job, it's not about just reporting to work, collecting a paycheck, and doing the bare minimum. It's about over-delivering every single time. Now, if you're going to do that as a talent, the employer has to do that for you just the same. So you're talking, if you're looking for a 9-to-5 job in the workforce, you want to have a robust benefits package. You want to have, a good compensation plan. And it goes hand in hand with your performance. Now, in the performance-based industry, it's kind of like there is no cap to how much you can earn, and you can make as much money as possible in your respective industry. So you got to think about always be recruiting. When you're out there, who has a mindset that you're looking for? Who has vision, a goal for themselves, for their family, for their children, for their community? Always be recruiting, scouting talent. And the key word here is talent. What are they really, really good at? What are their skill sets? And how can they help you and your business? And in turn, how do you help them become a better individual? That's why I created my top talent recruiting program, because we source top talent throughout the country. Okay, I have access to people who are in the sales industry, whether they're in performance-based industry, insurance sales, mortgages, real estate, HVAC, you name it. I have access to sales guys throughout the country. We also focus on healthcare, social work, community organizations, you name it, we have access to these candidates. And what we do is we pre-screen every candidate to find out where their skill sets are, what they're looking for when it comes to long-term employment, and how they intend to provide value to their potential employer. So check out the website, Dennis Development, that's DENIS Development, coachingservices.com. Schedule your free coaching call so you can learn more about my top talent recruiting program. Continue to raise the bar.